You're listening to Money Talks. My name is Michael Campbell. Money Talks is brought to you by Solera Club. Solera Club is a royalty-based investment. That means you get paid first. There are no fees attached with it, and it's in the tech sector. If you want more information, good idea to go to soleraclub.com. I'm broadcasting live from the World Outlook Conference at the Western Bayshore in Vancouver, and I got to say, despite the snow in Vancouver, and there was a lot of it yesterday, it really had huge traffic tie-ups. My goodness, was there a crowd last night, just huge. I was expecting half the people not to show. Boy, that certainly wasn't the case. It was standing room only, and I mean packed. You know, I get a lot of response to the show that basically says it's my job to be positive on the air. So let me start with being positive. If you've had enough of the political establishment, then everything's going pretty well for you. Regular listeners know we correctly identified the anti-establishment trend over a decade ago, which led us to predict both Brexit and Donald Trump's victory. Now, the key word is trend. We all have a tendency to be focused in the moment, but it's also incredibly important in your investments and just about everywhere else to see the bigger picture. I mean, it helps to see what's coming. Despite Brexit and Donald Trump's victory, my bet is that the anti-establishment trend still has a long way to go. It's not going to be straight line change or smooth sailing, but I'm going to be watching very closely what happens in the elections in France and Germany coming up. The status quo is not going to go down without a fight, and they're not. I mean, granted, the establishment was surprised by both Brexit and Trump and the Five Star Movement's victory in the Italian referendum. Heck, they were surprised with the defeat of the Vancouver transit referendum. But the reason's straightforward, and I think it's finally being appreciated by some. They live in an echo chamber. They only talk and listen to like-minded people. That's what I was discussing last week in the Goofy Award with the Women's March. No attempt to reach out, to bridge gaps there. No, it was just talking amongst themselves. And when presented with alternative opinions, the immediate response is to dismiss them. I mean, have you seen that video on YouTube that has all these notables, celebrities, politicians stating categorically that Donald Trump would never be president? It's interesting. Just go to YouTube, type in people who laughed at Trump. The next phase is to try and prevent people, though. When you get past dismissing them, you try and prevent people with opposing views from expressing them. While we regularly declare how tolerant we are, I certainly don't see any sign of that when it comes to entertaining alternative opinions. And there's a lot of examples of what I'm talking about. The very definition of ignorance in these people's minds is straightforward. It's someone who disagrees with them. Heck, I look at my email. I'm called all sorts of names, but really the essence isn't that my facts are incorrect, the research I'm presenting is incorrect, they just don't like the opinion. And now we're experiencing the next stage of response, and I think that's an important one. We're seeing violence. Both sides of the political spectrum are capable of it. I mean, there's numerous examples of well-known people actually calling for Donald Trump's assassination, and they do it with impunity. I mean, can you imagine if someone notable had called for the assassination of President Obama when he was first elected? I mean, it's ironic that some of the same people who are big proponents of things like anti-bullying campaigns bully when it comes to someone who doesn't share their views. I mean, we saw it last week in Berkeley when former Breitbart News tech editor, author, speaker Milo Yiannopoulos, boy, I'm good at names, Yiannopoulos, who Wikipedia characterizes as a vocal critic of third-wave feminism, Islam, social justice, political correctness, and other movements and ideologies he deems authoritarian or belonging to what he calls the regressive left. Mr. Yiannopoulos never got a chance to speak, though. That's the point. He was prevented by protests that quickly turned violent. There's a common theme of increasing civil violence over the past 3 years. In the U.S., it's obviously gained momentum with Donald Trump's election victory. And that's one of the byproducts of change, though. The more intense the era of change, the more intense the reaction's going to be. But here's my question today. It's straightforward. Whether you like Mr. Trump or you dislike him strongly, where do you think this all ends? Because I'm telling you, we're permitting it. We're condoning it. As I said, the tendency is to just look in the moment. Well, Donald Trump deserves it. What about the bigger picture? Since 2013, one of the main trends on Money Talks has been the rise and outlining the rise in civil unrest and violence. I don't think it's too difficult to see the escalation of that trend. My guess is that we're about to see a continued escalation in unrest and violence. After all, there's so little respect amongst each other, leading to a lack of common decency and civility between people with opposing views. In the States, democratic institutions are questioned by Mr. Trump, first before the election, and now those same institutions are being questioned by opponents, including former President Obama. I'm telling you, that doesn't lead to anywhere good. My point is, this is not a small deal. I don't think I would be surprised by anything from assassination of a public figure to even revolution, as difficult as that is to fathom. After all, look what we're witnessing right now. Well, what about in 10 years? What about in 10 years when pensions in the U.S. don't meet their obligations, especially in Europe with the demise of the welfare state? Social structures continue to erode. Is it really that far-fetched? Maybe. But then again, I ask people, did they predict the massive changes signaled by Brexit or Donald Trump's victory? What about the racial shootings in America, the breakdown in Venezuela, the Russian invasion of Ukraine? Maybe, just maybe, it's not so far-fetched. All I'm saying is that we're playing a very dangerous game here, condoning this kind of activity. Lack of civility and respect, the increasing use of violence and protest, challenges to the system, well, they all come at a cost. A cost which, by my observation, thinks that most people haven't considered. Reminder that Money Talks is brought to you by Solera Club. For more information, go to soleraclub.com. We're broadcasting live from the World Outlook Conference in the Weston Bayshore in downtown Vancouver. Coming up next, I got a real variety of guests for you today. I'm very pleased to welcome back Don Vialoux. He's live. He's going to be speaking in just a few minutes down here, but we're going to get a preview right here at the Weston Bayshore in downtown Vancouver. Stay with us. Oh, you can't do better than Joe Jackson. 1984 hit, No Matter What You Want. Oh, that's the good stuff. And speaking of the good stuff, I've got Don Vialoux down here with me. You can find him at timingthemarket.ca. Now, Don, of course, is speaking in about 15 minutes' time, so we've just grabbed him here for a moment. Don, by the way, congratulations. You also made it through the snow. But
we did.
The snow is the main feature. And we were chatting a minute ago about, the impact on investments.
Yeah, it's interesting flying into Vancouver, and it's snowing. It's not supposed to do that in the month of February. But this is not unusual. A couple of weeks ago, we had a snowfall in Tokyo, first one in several decades. We had snow actually in L.A. for a few hours, would you believe? And, people that go to Hawaii, they normally like to go up to the top of that volcano where it's so gorgeous up there. They couldn't do it this year. A big snowstorm. Yeah. So something's happening here.
And also, we can throw in Palm Desert, because a lot of listeners actually listen to us listen live on cknw.com, in the Chorus Network. And the number of reports I got back, we've never seen anything like it. I mean, we were warmer in Vancouver about 2 weeks ago than it was in Palm Desert. Both were cold, but they were even worse.
Well, the weather prediction for the next 3 months, right through until April, is for colder than average temperatures in the Vancouver area and more precipitation than average as well. Now the question is, how can you take advantage of that? Well, see, if you're going to have colder than average weather in the northern part of the U.S. and southern part of Canada, it means that there's going to be a lot more natural gas that's going to be burned. And that means that Canadian energy stocks, which are currently very depressed, have an excellent opportunity for a seasonal trade right through until about the middle of April.
But you've also made a lot of money for our listeners over the years. Speaking of the same sector, the energy sector, with gasoline also. Talking about, I can't remember what the numbers are, but been profitable 20 out of 22 years or something like that. It's been amazing probability to buy gasoline sort of in this period of time. And I think selling it usually a little bit later in April when the refineries are switching over to a summer grade. So.
Yeah, normally I would make that recommendation, but this year not. And the reason is that gasoline inventories are very, very high. But let's talk about Trump for a second and what he's doing to the markets. Historically, when you get a new president after an 8-year previous presidency, markets don't do very well for about the first 4 months because of all the changes in the administration and so on. But look at the two best situations to compare. When Reagan was first elected and when Eisenhower was elected, both of those presidents had very successful presidencies where during their time markets soared. Mm-hmm. But if you look at what happened when Reagan was elected, first year, 1981, the market, the first 8 months actually went lower before it hit its very important low in September and took off. Same thing with Eisenhower back in 1953 when he first became president. Markets for the first 8 months actually went slightly lower, but that was the setup for a major move on the upside. Now, which of those scenarios we're going to see this time? Well, it does tell us that we're going to see choppy markets at least for the next 4 months, and then the possibility of upside move from there. But be cautious for a while, but there are opportunities lining up here as well.
Yeah, that's fascinating because I remember looking at the November 9th to December 31st in Eisenhower. That's the other period I noted where Trump did so well. Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
compared to with what Trump's done, compared to other presidencies. So, and it's also fascinating to see after an 8-year, consecutive term run, the impact there. And it makes sense to me on a fundamental way is that, obviously Mr. Trump's proposing a heck of a lot of stuff, but he is proposing a lot of things that the business community is seeing as positive. They seem to be negative on the immigration stuff, but they're positive on the tax changes, the regulatory changes, that kind of stuff. And then we'll have to see what happens with NAFTA.
Sure.
Yeah.
Change is hard,
Yeah.
and when it comes to politics. But the key is, as an investor, you could take advantage of that by watching the trends that are happening.
Mm-hmm.
And there are going to be some really interesting opportunities happening in the year 2017. So stay tuned.
Yeah. Well, let me just ask you, part of the work in timingthemarket.ca you do is looking at the seasonality, and it's very much like one of the things that you've alerted to our listeners to is like the Indian wedding season, where there's a big up push in the demand for gold, as an example. Are we in the season, or what season are we sort of going into here in terms of buyers?
Well, it's fascinating because there are certain sectors which are currently in gear. Base metal sector, obviously, industrials, consumer discretionary. But the one that's most fascinating is gold and silver. Mm-hmm. We saw silver prices break out last week above 1736, complete a beautiful reverse head and shoulders pattern, implying significantly higher prices. Gold and silver and their equities do very well right through at least until the end of February. And they have another period of seasonal strength coming in the summertime. But for right now, this sector is in gear and is acting very well.
Well, Don, I know you got to go give a speech, so thank you very much for stopping by. And I know you give a great flavor of what you're going to be talking about today, and I know the audience will love it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mike.
Don Vialoux, you can find him at timingthemarket.ca, a real friend of our shows, as I consider the leading proponent of looking at how seasonality and technical analysis come together to increase the probability that you'll be successful. As I say, I'm broadcasting live from the Western Bay Shore down at the World Outlook Conference. A crowd is building. They are obviously not caring about the inclement weather, the snowy conditions, and they shouldn't. It's supposed to be actually the best of the days. Tomorrow looks like it's going to be more snowy, but people may be watching the Super Bowl at that point. So I'll take a break right now. Rob Levy's going to join me. A couple of top stories to talk about when we come back right here on the Money Talks Network. Stay with us. We have such a great show planned for you today. I mean, we have so many people. We're here at the World Outlook Conference, but so many people dropping by. Jeff Olin's going to be with me in a few minutes' time. James Thorne's going to be with me. The list is a long one. Mark Leibovit is coming by. But right now, I've got Rob Levy stopping in. He's busy down here all day today. But, Rob, I wanted to chat with you about a couple things. One is you were, of course, here last night listening to some of the themes that were coming through. What grabbed you?
Well, right off the bat, Mike, it was Jim Thorne yesterday who came out with this comment to look to U.S. financials. He gave some very key takeaways from what he was saying, but I mean, the one that just hit me on the head is, this is a sector that's going to potentially be, or there's talk, and we even saw rumors last night of being unregulated in the U.S. or look to be unregulated by U.S. financials. I mean, to me, that thing just bopped out and hit me on the head.
Yeah, it's interesting to compare the Canadian financial sector, led by the banks, of course, and their valuations being so much higher than the U.S. And he's saying that there's, and I hope to grab him later and get him on the air. He's saying it's sort of like that game may be changing here, and there might be real opportunity within that.
That's right, and I mean, even some of the names, he talked about Goldman Sachs as a comparable to the Royal Bank of Canada and how undervalued Goldman was, but you wouldn't even think about it because you look at the headline news in the media right now, everyone's talking about the run Goldman's been on and how far it's gone up so quickly. So, I mean, even in that perspective, U.S. banks are up something, the bank index, 27% in the last 3 months, so they've gone on quite a tear, but he's still saying, have a look at those U.S. financials. Well,
it's interesting because we've had so much what I'd call political focus on Mr. Trump. To me, a lot of it's just a rehash of the election. The same people who were opposed there continue to be opposed to him here, and so that's just playing out as politics. But it has overshadowed some of the discussion and the talk about some of the things like the regulatory changes that are coming, like every new regulation you add, he's signed an executive order that says you got to get rid of two other ones. The Frank Dodd Act, which was the banking industry said was too constricting on them, and so he's changing that also. So there is some policy stuff, if you get past the personality issues, that are grabbing people's attention now.
Yeah, that's right. And he passed it on to Congress because really with his executive order, what he can do in terms of bank regulation is very limited. That's up to Congress.
Yeah.
It lacks in the regulations. And if they do, it is a very conservative Republican Congress. And, do they remove proprietary trading? That was one of the big things that stands out from Dodd-Frank in the financial crisis because of the implications it had. Banks trading for their own books and, taking them out of the market. I mean, it talks of volatility in the market and, many more issues it sparks up, but it is certainly something to watch.
Well, let me just go to one other aspect. We've been hearing a lot about the Immigration Act or whatever you call the executive order regarding immigration. New news that a judge, has struck that down. He says, well, we're going to get rid of, we're going to overcome that. But the bottom line, I'm more interested in the reaction of the CEOs because it's pretty, or some CEOs anyways, have been pretty dramatic.
Every single multinational company in the U.S. had to issue some sort of press release either to their employees or just publicly to state their opinion on how they felt about this, and there was a lot of negative backlash. I mean, never you've seen something like that or read about something like that against a current U.S. administration.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. I mean, we have a tendency to get a little too focused on the president, but I was sort of racking my brain thinking, have I seen that kind of a reaction from publicly traded companies, monster-sized companies, so en masse?
Yeah, absolutely right. And, as an investor, I mean, the politics of it aside, as an investor, it opens up the question. I mean, does speaking out on this social issue create a negative backlash against your ban? Because, as the polls showed all week, some 50% of Americans agree with it. Or, I mean, even the...
but again, it seems like it goes right down to that 50-50 split in the electorate. That was there pre any of this.
Absolutely right. I mean, the one most interesting later in the week was the CEO of Uber, Travis Kalanick. I mean, he has to step down from the president's business council. He didn't by any means endorse the guy, but he's got to step down because people don't want to use Uber because he's there.
Well, it was I don't know, it's sort of humorous that remember when the New York taxi cabs decided to go at strike at JFK, for an hour, in protest. Then Uber said, oh, well, we're still here and we'll lower our rates. We won't have that sort of prime rate charges. And that certainly created a backlash. And I just think that's a microcosm of what we're going into here.
Exactly. And we've talked about the populism at the political level. Yeah. I mean, this is almost populism at the corporate level, too, because they have to react. And which side are they on?
Well, it's going to be interesting. It's not going to be boring for us anyways. Rob, thanks very much for dropping by. I know you got a lot of stuff on today, and great to see you. And then people who come down and get a chance to chat with Victor Adair's down here, and Vic will join me a little bit later. Rob Levy's down here, and a whole raft of experts and analysts. So it's going to be a good day. Rob, thanks. By the way, a reminder that if you go to moneytalks.net, if you can't attend the conference, they will also sell the videos for this. And that'll be available, I think, as soon as Monday. I mean, team works on it right away. But it was fascinating talks last night. We'll share more of it as we come through. But Jeff Olin, James Thorne, Mark Leavitt, all of that coming your way. So stay right here on the Money Talks Network.